They say love is pure. But what if I told you that for centuries, powerful men never chased love? They engineered it? What if the most influential seducers in history didn't rely on beauty, wealth, or charm, but on something far more dangerous? Psychological manipulation so subtle, so precise, that even the woman never realized she'd fallen into it until it was far too late. You see, love in its rawest form is not a choice. It's a chemical war between desire and reason. It's a storm that begins quietly, and before you know it, it consumes you. But what if someone could control that storm? What if a man could direct where the lightning strikes, not by force, not by deceit, but by understanding the secret architecture of the human mind? This isn't about flirting. It's not about pickup lines, charm, or charisma. This is about control, invisible control, the kind that doesn't show itself in grand gestures or words, but in small psychological adjustments, tiny manipulations that shape perception, emotion, and belief. And the man who designed the foundation for this dark art was Niccolò Machiavelli, a thinker whose name has become synonymous with cunning, deception, and power. Machiavelli wasn't a lover. He was a strategist. He observed kings, popes, generals, and realized that human behavior could be predicted, directed, even engineered. He saw that people didn't move out of love or morality. They moved because of fear, desire, and self-interest. To him, every interaction was a negotiation of control. Every smile a potential weapon. Every act of kindness a calculated move in a larger game. But here's the disturbing question. What happens when these same political strategies, the ones designed to rule empires, are applied not to nations, but to hearts? What happens when someone uses Machiavellian thinking not to gain power over people, but to make a single person obsess over them? Imagine this. A man walks into a woman's life quietly. He doesn't chase, he doesn't beg, he doesn't compete. He simply observes. He studies her laugh, her silence, her insecurities, her desires, not through conversation but through patterns. He learns what makes her feel alive. He learns what makes her feel seen. And when he finally speaks, his words don't sound rehearsed or artificial. They sound like her own thoughts, spoken back to her with perfect timing. She doesn't realize what's happening, but slowly her emotional defenses begin to melt. Why? Because the mind is always drawn to familiarity. And the greatest seducer doesn't create attraction. He mirrors it. He becomes everything she unconsciously wants, her reflection, her echo, her missing half. And that's when the trap begins to close. To her it feels like destiny. To him it's design. Machiavelli would call this the illusion of choice. You let your target believe she is freely choosing you, while in reality, every step of that emotional journey was mapped out, guided and controlled. He once wrote, "Men are so simple and so much creatures of circumstance that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived." But in the context of seduction, this becomes even darker. People don't resist what they want to believe. They surrender to it. Think about it. How many times has someone fallen in love, not with who a person truly is, but with the idea they represent? That idealized version built out of projection, fantasy, and need. The Machiavellian seducer doesn't fight that illusion. He builds it, brick by brick, word by word, until she's living inside a dream that he designed. And the deeper she falls into that dream, the more control he gains. Not because he demands it, but because she offers it. Willingly, lovingly, completely. That is the purest form of psychological domination. The power to make someone choose their own submission. And yet here lies the paradox. Because behind every manipulator lies a truth they can't escape. The illusion must never collapse. The moment the mask slips, the magic dies. So the game never ends. The seducer must stay unpredictable, mysterious, always slightly out of reach. He must keep feeding the illusion, adjusting it, perfecting it, or else the woman will awaken and see the puppet strings. That's the dark side of Machiavelli's genius, his brilliance in understanding that power is not taken by force. It's granted by belief. And belief, here's the easiest thing to shape in the human mind. So tonight we dive deeper, not into history but into psychology, into the uncomfortable truth that the same principles used to build empires are the ones used to conquer emotions, that the same manipulations that start wars can also start romances, And once you recognize these patterns, in others, or even in yourself, you'll never look at attraction the same way again, because what you call chemistry might be conditioning, what you call fate might be strategy, and what you call love might just be Machiavelli's dirtiest method, disguised as destiny. To understand how Machiavelli's method seduces, manipulates, and controls, you first have to enter the mind of Machiavelli himself, a man who saw human beings not as noble, loving creatures, but as predictable instruments of desire, fear, and self-preservation. Niccolò Machiavelli lived during a time of chaos, a world where loyalty meant nothing, where kings smiled at each other before sending assassins into the night. He studied people, not to love them, but to map them. He realized something most still refuse to accept, that human beings are not guided by morality. They are driven by motives. Every action, every affection, every word we speak is rooted in two primal engines, the need for gain and the fear of loss. To Machiavelli, this wasn't cynicism, it was truth. He stripped away the illusions of goodness and saw what lies beneath, that love, loyalty, and kindness are often strategies, not virtues. Now imagine that same philosophy turned towards seduction. Imagine someone who doesn't see attraction as emotional chaos, but as a system that can be understood, triggered, and directed. That is the essence of the Machiavellian mind. He knows that people are emotional machines, beautifully complex, but fundamentally predictable once you understand their patterns. He knows that everyone is wearing a mask, and that behind every mask is a need screaming to be fulfilled. The need to be admired, the need to feel chosen, the need to feel special in a world that constantly ignores them. So the Machiavellian seducer does not begin with charm, he begins with observation. He listens more than he speaks. He watches the eyes, because the eyes reveal what words try to hide. He studies tone, rhythm, hesitation. He learns the story beneath the story, the emotional blueprint of a person's insecurities and longings, and when he finally acts, he doesn't impose his world, he enters hers. He becomes what she recognizes, what she trusts, what she secretly aches for. It's not magic, it's psychology. You see, Machiavelli understood something modern psychologists call mirroring, the unconscious imitation of another person's behavior, speech, or emotion to build rapport. But he didn't use it to connect. He used it to control. By reflecting a person's essence back at them, you make them feel deeply understood. And in a world where most people feel unseen, that's irresistible. When a woman looks at a man and sees pieces of herself, her values, her pain, her passion, reflected back through him, her mind labels that reflection as trust. She thinks, finally, someone who gets me. But she doesn't realize that what she's seeing isn't authenticity. It's architecture. Every smile, every nod, every silence, designed, every word, a carefully chosen note in a symphony of influence. This is where the seducer gains his power, not by dominating her will, but by guiding it invisibly. Machiavelli taught that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. But in seduction, fear takes a different shape. Not the fear of danger, but the fear of losing emotional security. When you mirror a person's desires so well that your absence feels like emptiness, you create dependence. It's a form of emotional hypnosis. She begins to crave your approval the way the body craves air. Because deep down what she truly seeks isn't you, it's the feeling she experiences when she's around you. And that's the darkest secret of all. People don't fall in love with other people. They fall in love with the version of themselves they feel reflected in that person's presence. The Machiavellian understands this perfectly. He doesn't have to chase affection. He manufactures it. He doesn't beg for validation. He gives it strategically, so that every word of praise feels like sunlight after days of darkness. To the untrained eye, it looks like connection. To the Machiavellian mind, it's conditioning, step by step, layer by layer. He constructs emotional dependency, not through deceit, but through precision. He knows that the key to control isn't confrontation, it's calibration. You don't push emotions, you guide them. You don't demand loyalty. You inspire it by feeding the soul just enough to keep it hungry. That's why Machiavelli's teachings are not about cruelty, they're about strategy. He saw power as a game of awareness, and awareness in the realm of human emotion, becomes irresistible magnetism. But here's where it turns darker still. Once the seducer learns how easily people give away their emotional power, he starts to lose his empathy. He starts to see love not as a shared experience, but as a chessboard where hearts are pawns, and emotions are just tools to achieve a result. He doesn't mean to become cruel. It happens naturally as power replaces sincerity. Because when you know how to make anyone desire you, authenticity begins to feel unnecessary. When someone feels safe, they stop searching. When they believe they fully understand you, the mystery fades, and with it their hunger to know more. That's why the Machiavellian seducer never allows anyone to feel entirely sure of him. He knows that human attraction doesn't thrive in peace. It thrives in tension, because tension keeps the mind awake. It keeps the heart alert. It's the uncertainty, not the security, that pulls a person deeper. To the Machiavellian mind, control is not maintained by dominance, but by confusion. Not open confrontation, but emotional contrast. He gives warmth and then withdraws it. He shows affection, then disappears. He opens his soul, just enough for her to step in, then closes the door without warning. And what happens next is psychological alchemy. Her brain, trained to seek patterns, becomes restless. She starts asking questions. Did I do something wrong? Did I misread the signs? The mind begins to replay every interaction, searching for hidden meaning. And while she's busy analyzing the puzzle, her emotions are already tied to it. Because the human mind can't stop thinking about what it doesn't understand. This is controlled unpredictability, one of the darkest psychological levers of influence. It's the same principle used by casinos, social media and marketing psychology, intermittent reinforcement. When rewards come at random, the brain produces far more dopamine than it does from consistency. That unpredictability makes the experience addictive, and in love that unpredictability becomes obsession. Each time he withdraws, her emotional system panics. When he returns, even briefly, the relief floods her brain with pleasure, and that relief becomes chemically bound to his presence. It's no longer about who he is. It's about what she feels when he returns. That's why the Machiavellian doesn't chase. He simply manages his availability like a weapon, creating scarcity, then reward, then scarcity again. He knows that people value what they can't predict, and they crave what they can't fully possess. In this emotional push and pull, the woman becomes the pursuer without realizing it. She starts justifying his distance. She invents reasons for his silence. She starts thinking, he's just busy, or he's complicated, deep, different. She fills the gaps he creates with her own imagination, and that's the trick. Because imagination is far more powerful than reality. By creating uncertainty, the Machiavellian doesn't just control what she feels, he controls what she thinks about him. He becomes the question that her mind can't stop trying to answer, and the more she analyzes him, the deeper she falls into the web. You see, Machiavelli wrote that men are driven more by the fear of loss than by the hope of gain. And in Seduction, this principle transforms into emotional gravity. When a person fears losing your affection, they'll do almost anything to keep it. That's why the Machiavellian keeps his intentions just out of reach, never fully clear, never entirely predictable. He leaves traces of interest, but never enough to create certainty. He gives the mind just enough to dream, but not enough to rest. It's a delicate dance, too much distance and the connection dies, too much closeness and the mystery dissolves. But balance them perfectly, and you create the most intoxicating emotion of all, hope. Hope is the drug of seduction. It makes people stay long after logic tells them to leave. It makes them forgive what they shouldn't. It makes them interpret silence as depth and absence as meaning. That's how emotional control works. Not through direct force, but through psychological rhythm. Push, pull, give, withhold, appear, vanish. Each move feeds a deeper narrative. The belief that there is something special here, something worth waiting for, something worth chasing. And the more effort she invests, the more she convinces herself it must be real. This is known in psychology as cognitive dissonance. The more we suffer for something, the more we justify its value. The Machiavellian knows this instinctively. He doesn't beg for loyalty. He makes people earn it. Because once someone works for your attention, They become emotionally attached to the effort itself. It's not about cruelty, it's about leverage. He uses emotion as currency, uncertainty as interest, and time as the investment. And before long, she's no longer asking, "Does he like me?" She's asking, "What can I do to make him love me again?" That's when control becomes complete. Because once a person starts adjusting themselves to fit your behavior, you've already reprogrammed their emotional center. Machiavelli didn't need to raise his voice or demand devotion. He understood that people are most loyal not to those who give them everything, but to those who make them fight for it. To her, it feels like romance. To him, it's strategy. To psychology, it's simply conditioning. But here lies the hidden danger. The same uncertainty that ignites attraction also breeds anxiety. And anxiety, when sustained long enough, transforms into dependency. So the Machiavellian seducer creates not love, but emotional addiction. The woman doesn't just miss him. She misses the relief that only his attention brings. She becomes a slave to the cycle he controls. And yet this power comes at a cost, because the moment he stops managing that tension, the illusion begins to fade. If he becomes too predictable, too open, too honest, the magic vanishes. That's why the Machiavellian must always stay one step ahead, unreachable, unknowable, undefined. Not because he doesn't care, but because his control depends on her uncertainty. He's not the flame she holds. He's the shadow that keeps moving, just beyond her grasp. That is the art of controlled uncertainty, the most dangerous form of psychological seduction ever devised. It doesn't conquer through passion or promise, but through confusion, curiosity, and the one emotion no heart can resist, the need to know more. There's a moment in every manipulation when silence becomes louder than words. That moment is withdrawal. After confusion comes absence, and absence, when timed with precision, becomes the most powerful form of control there is. You see, when you take something away that someone has grown emotionally dependent on, their mind doesn't simply let it go. It panics, it searches, it aches to restore the balance that was broken. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology ever gave it a name. He knew that presence builds comfort, but withdrawal builds value. Because when something disappears, the human mind inflates its importance. Think about it. When someone is always around, you take them for granted. But when they vanish without explanation, every memory becomes sacred, every word replayed, every silence filled with speculation. That's not love, that's scarcity. And scarcity, Machiavelli realized, is the foundation of influence. So, after the seducer has mirrored her desires and confused her emotions with uncertainty, he begins the next phase, strategic disappearance. He doesn't argue. He doesn't announce it. He simply fades, leaving only a trace of warmth behind, enough to haunt her thoughts but not enough to satisfy them. And in that absence, her mind begins to build a story. She wonders where he went, what changed, what she did wrong. She replays the last conversation, searching for hidden clues. This is where the real manipulation happens, not in presence but in perception. Because withdrawal doesn't just remove you physically, it inserts you psychologically. It forces the other person to think about you, to reconstruct your image over and over, until they can no longer separate memory from fantasy. She doesn't realize it, but the more she tries to forget, the deeper you sink into her subconscious. That's because the human brain has a cruel tendency. It remembers incompleteness more vividly than closure. It's the reason unfinished songs get stuck in your head. It's why cliffhangers torment us. The mind can't let go of an open loop. So when the Machiavellian vanishes, he becomes an unfinished story, a question mark carved into her emotions. And every unanswered question pulls her deeper into obsession. In modern psychology, this is known as the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember incomplete experiences more than completed ones. But Machiavelli, centuries before the term existed, already knew it instinctively. He turned absence into an emotional echo, because the moment she begins to chase closure, he owns the rhythm of her thoughts. She might tell herself she's moved on. She might even date someone else. But in quiet moments, the late-night scroll, the drive alone, the silence before sleep, his memory returns not as comfort, but as curiosity. And curiosity always reopens the door. Then when he finally reappears, days, weeks, maybe months later, his return feels electric. She tells herself she's angry, that she won't let him in again. But beneath that anger is relief. Relief that the silence is over. Relief that the loop might finally close. Relief that the ghost has taken shape again. And that's where Machiavelli's brilliance lies, because now he doesn't have to prove his worth. Her own mind has done it for him. His absence created the illusion of significance. His return feels like redemption. He understands what most people never do, that distance creates desire, and desire sustained through distance becomes dependency. It's not the constant presence that binds someone to you. It's the emotional void you leave behind when you step away. A void that no one else can fill, because it was crafted to her specific psychology, her insecurities, her fantasies, her unresolved longings. And that's the cruel genius of the Machiavellian seducer. He doesn't conquer through touch, he conquers through memory. He becomes the emotion she can't unfeel, the thought she can't silence, the absence she keeps trying to fill. But here's the paradox. The more control he gains through absence, the more distance he must maintain. Because once he becomes too available, the spell breaks. Once he offers too much truth, the illusion collapses. So he lives between presence and disappearance, always one step away. A ghost she keeps chasing through the corridors of her own mind. To her, he feels like destiny, a connection that can't be explained. But to him, it's design. A rhythm of presence and absence so perfectly measured that it feels supernatural. And yet behind this mastery lies a quiet tragedy, because the seducer who lives by withdrawal eventually isolates himself. When every connection is a strategy, no bond feels real. When every silence is a weapon, even peace becomes suspicious. He can control hearts, yes, but he can never rest his own, because to rest would mean to trust. And to trust is to lose control. So he keeps dancing in and out of lives, building castles of illusion that collapse the moment they're touched. And the irony, even as he controls others, he becomes a prisoner of his own tactics, addicted to the very uncertainty he creates. Machiavelli taught that to hold power, you must be willing to step back, to let others crave your return. But what he never said is that some who play this game never return at all. They disappear behind their own masks, too afraid to be seen without them. Because once you learn to control through absence, you begin to fear presence. Once you master withdrawal, you start to fear being known. That is the dark cost of power. You can make others love you, miss you, need you. But you may never again feel the purity of someone loving you, not the illusion you created. And so, the Machiavellian seducer wins every heart, except his own. Every great illusion ends the same way, not with a revelation, but with exhaustion. After all the reflection, the uncertainty, the withdrawal, something begins to break. Not in the one being controlled, but in the one who's controlling. Because control, for all its power, is a fragile thing. It must be maintained, balanced, adjusted, and constantly fed by someone else's reaction. And that's the tragedy of Machiavellian seduction. It promises dominance, but it breeds dependency. You become addicted to the power you hold, to the way someone's eyes light up when you return, to the way their silence grows heavy when you disappear. It's intoxicating. The feeling of being the axis around which another person's emotions spin, but like all intoxicants, it starts to hollow you out. Because the more you manipulate emotion, the less you can feel it honestly. The more you design affection, the less you can believe in love. That is the hidden curse inside Machiavelli's method. It conquers others, but it corrodes the self. You see, the human mind wasn't built to operate entirely in strategy. It craves meaning, warmth, authenticity. Even those who manipulate eventually long to be understood, not studied. They long to be loved, not obeyed. But once you've lived through manipulation, you stop trusting the simple things. You question kindness. You doubt sincerity. You start to see motives in every gesture, angles in every word. You turn life itself into a chessboard. And eventually, you realize there's no one left to play against but your own reflection. Machiavelli himself may not have known love in the way poets describe it, but he understood its power. He saw that affection, when shaped correctly, can control nations more effectively than fear or punishment. He simply stripped it of its tenderness and used it as a political weapon. But what happens when that weapon enters the personal realm? when you use manipulation not to rule an empire, but to rule a heart. At first it works. You become the mystery that cannot be ignored, the absence that commands attention, the riddle that demands to be solved. But then, something unexpected happens. You start to feel the same emptiness you planted in others, because the mind that lives in deception starts to distrust even its own emotions. When every gesture has a purpose, sincerity becomes a foreign language. When every connection is a strategy, intimacy feels like exposure. And when you always need to be in control, love, that wild, unpredictable force, becomes the enemy. The Machiavellian seducer builds walls so intricate that even he can't find his way out. He begins to miss the innocence of not knowing. He begins to envy those who still believe in chance, in chemistry, in something real. Because though manipulation can make people fall for you, it can never make them stay for who you are. They're in love with the mask, not the man behind it. And one day, when the mask slips, when exhaustion sets in, when control fails, as it always does, he's left standing alone in the silence he once used as a weapon. The silence that used to give him power now sounds like punishment. The absence that once made him valuable now makes him invisible. It's poetic in a dark way. The manipulator becomes trapped in the same illusion he created, a prisoner of his own performance. And that's where the real twist lies. Because Machiavelli's method does work, terrifyingly well. It can make people fall, chase, obsess, and surrender, but it can never create peace. It wins the body, maybe even the mind, but never the soul. And without the soul, without genuine connection, control becomes meaningless. Like holding an empty crown. You can rule someone's emotions, but you'll never feel their heart beat for you. In the end, the Machiavellian seducer realizes that the greatest power is not control. It's vulnerability. Because vulnerability is truth, and truth is the one thing manipulation can never fully imitate. To open your heart, to risk rejection, to love without strategy, that's real courage. That's what separates the manipulator from the master. One controls out of fear of being unloved. The other leads with strength born from self-awareness. And that brings us back to the real lesson buried inside all this darkness. Understanding manipulation isn't about using it, it's about recognizing it, protecting yourself from it, and transforming that awareness into wisdom. Because the same principles that can enslave a mind can also free one. When you see through manipulation, it loses its power. When you understand that uncertainty and withdrawal are designed to control you, you can stop chasing ghosts and start seeing patterns. You begin to reclaim your emotional autonomy, your ability to feel without being programmed, and that's where real mastery begins. Not in controlling others, but in controlling your response to them. That's what Machiavelli never wrote. Because the ultimate power isn't the ability to seduce, it's the ability to stay authentic in a world addicted to illusion. So yes, Machiavelli's Dirtiest method can make anyone fall. It can turn attraction into addiction, love into dependency, and attention into power. But it can never build what all humans ultimately crave, connection that requires no manipulation to sustain it. True power is calm. It doesn't chase and it doesn't scheme. It simply is. And maybe that's the final irony of all this, that the one who no longer needs to control anyone becomes the only one who truly understands control.